Thank you, everyone that's joining in, and good morning to you all. My name is SHAKIRA WEATHERDON, and I'll be your moderator for this morning. I am the Director of Equity and Belonging with Labor and Advanced Education, and so thrilled that the Workplace Initiatives team at LAE have invited and given me this honor to share this learning space with you all. We're really excited to host this conversation and share some promising practices on equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, but certainly I think for all of us in our communities as well. We're also hosting some other sessions, and so I invite you to tune into our keynote speaker, Ravi Tangri, at 12:45 this afternoon. We also have some resources that you can find in the partners page for the conference, as well as our Skills Online webinar, which is another session we're hosting at 1:30 to learn more about resources for your companies across Nova Scotia. So I won't talk too long, so I'll just share a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, and let some of my colleagues here take over. We all know that equity, diversity, and inclusion is very important to us in our communities, in our homes, and certainly in our workplaces. Each of us have a leadership role to play in ensuring that we are creating an environment that prioritizes the safety, well-being, and belonging of all employees and all people we work with. This morning, we will share some promising practices, but I'm also hoping that you will share some of your thoughts with us in the chat section of some of the things you are doing that have been working, and perhaps some challenges that you're having that we might be able to support you with, whether this morning or in other mediums. I know certainly that the folks at Workplace Initiatives, and certainly at LAE, Labor and Advanced Education, are always ready to support you in advancing workplaces that are inclusive and welcoming for all Nova Scotians. So without further ado, I'll invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will get started with those hard questions we have planned for them this morning. So Fiona, do you want to start us off?
Sure, happy to. Thank you, SHAKIRA. Good morning, everyone. Danci Skeleton, that means hello in Cree and in Mi'kmaq. I'm also very deeply grateful to all of you for the opportunity to be here today in beautiful Jipuktuk, in beautiful Mi'kmaq territory, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And I am the National Advisor, Kaniganit, with Deloitte Indigenous. And Kaniganit is a Cree word that actually is part of my title. I was honored to be invited to have a Cree title. And it means the one in front, or as my grandfather would have said, he was a hunter, trapper, fisherman, and he would have called his lead sled dog Kaniganit. So I'm the lead dog at Deloitte Indigenous. So my role is national in scope. I have a 40-year career. I've lived in 4 provinces, 1 territory, and Scotland. I have a breadth of experience. I'm a very proud Nihidao Iskuyo, meaning a woodland Cree woman, and my spirit name is Standing Elk of the Eagle Clan. I'm a proud member of Lac La Ronge First Nation, Treaty 6, Northern Saskatchewan. I believe it's important for me to state these things because I want youth who come after me to see that they have a place in corporate Canada, that they can see themselves in a leadership role, and that they can be proud to bring their full selves to work. I want people to realize, and this is everyone, I want people to realize that who they are is exactly what our workplaces need. So with that, I will turn it over to someone else who would like to introduce themselves, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you for being here with us and sharing of yourself, Fiona. Maybe we'll ask you, Matt, to introduce yourself before we go to Brittney.
Perfect. Thanks, SHAKIRA, and great introduction as always, Fiona. So Matthew Martel, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the BBI here in Halifax. So I grew up in Cape Breton and came here to Halifax to study business at Dalhousie and St. Mary's. I have a background in human resources and recruitment, working for Knightsbridge, Robertson Surrett, as well as HRM. So through both of those roles, witnessed a lot of changes and interesting progress, as well as challenges in the industry. So with that, I also sit on multiple boards, the Downtown Halifax Business Commission and the Halifax International Airport Authority, to name a couple. I think it's an extremely important session that we have on the go here, and I certainly appreciate everyone who has the courage to be vulnerable and share some of the challenges that they face, and really put themselves out there for their organization and for their own personal development. So happy to be here. Really looking forward to the questions and conversation that comes out of this. So thanks.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for being with us this morning as well. Last but certainly not least, Brittney.
Thank you, Shakira, and thank you to my panel colleagues, Matt and Fiona. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning. I hope we can get into some really good conversation, and thank you to everybody who's joining us. The fact that you're taking time to be present here today tells me that you recognize how important this conversation is, and I hope that everyone finds something that they can take away from this morning and bring it into their work lives and also personal lives, because we're all obligated to share this kind of messaging with our spheres of influence, whether it's our families, our colleagues, or beyond in the community of communities that we find ourselves in. So as Shakira mentioned, my name is Brittney. I'm a Nova Scotian by choice, is how I like to identify myself. I'm originally from Toronto, but I saw the light and came back to Nova Scotia, and I'm raising my family here in beautiful Kings County, where I always try and let people know that we have 240 days of sun. So some other places in Nova Scotia are kind of dreary by comparison. So if you're looking for sun, Kings is the place to be. And in my professional life, I'm the diversity and outreach specialist for the municipality of the County of Kings. We are one of the original signatories to what's now known as the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. And we've been doing a lot of work in making sure that Kings is a place where all people choose to be, but also all people belong. And so that's kind of what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm hoping to bring to the table in discussion here today about what things we can do to have create positive disruption and increase senses of belonging for all people. So thank you very much for having me.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Brittney. And I love that Nova Scotian by choice. From one Nova Scotian by choice to another. Thank you. So we don't have much time, really. An hour is never enough. And I'm as excited as I think everyone is to get it into the questions. So we have a few here, but I'll also invite all those who are attending to certainly put your questions in the Q&A section of the chat, and certainly also send us some notes so we know you're there as well. So our first question, and then maybe I'll ask you, Brittney, to go first, and then we come to you, Matt and Fiona. What qualities in a leader needs to be demonstrated to show commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion? And what do employees need to see from you as a leader to feel safe and have a sense of belonging?
So that's a big question. So I think when we talk about leadership and leadership's obligations in this sphere, it's really important to acknowledge that what we're working towards is belonging, and that things and tools around diversity, equity, and inclusion are ways we get to belonging. So with that in mind, I don't think you ever really get there. You don't really ever arrive, because you can't take your foot off the gas with this kind of thing, right? So that just kind of will probably contextualize what I'm going to say. But my number one non-negotiable for leaders or anybody really on this earth, I guess, is an unwavering commitment to truth-telling. Because, if we don't understand the why and we don't understand the how, we're never going to be able to actually come up with concrete solutions. So from my perspective, we need to get comfortable in the discomfort that comes from truth-telling. We need to know that it's okay to be uncomfortable with that. It might hurt. when we bump into things that don't feel good, it's probably because we're hitting into areas of privilege for ourselves, whether it's economic, racial, gendered privilege, all those kind of things. When we start to feel discomfort, first of all, it means you're doing it right. And second of all, it probably means that you're finding an area of growth for yourself. And I think when we talk about things like equity hiring, we need to start talking about why we're comfortable with the truth that a certain demographic has been overrepresented for a very long time. And when we get comfortable talking about the overrepresentation of some to the detriment of others, we can actually make progress. So, for example, women of federally elected officials worldwide, 13% are female identifying people. 13% globally. Like, that's unacceptable. In fact, women are heads of states in only 22 countries, and 120 have never had a woman leader. You know, so that's concerning. And at the current rate, it's going to take us 130 years to get to gender equity in elected officials. So that's something that I'm concerned about. Although I will give Kings a shout out. We do actually have parity in gender in our council, and our deputy mayor is a woman, and Deputy Mayor Emily Lutz is also president of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. So we are seeing good things, but we have lots of work to do, and it doesn't get much better when you start talking about C-suite representation, boards, committees, those kind of things. You know, we know that 80% of board seats, paid board positions in this country, are held by men. That's unacceptable. So we have to be honest about these things. We have to have truthful conversations, and then we can move forward in doing meaningful work. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I love that, Brittany, that, you know, inclusive leaders have an unwavering commitment to truth telling, right? That really is so powerful. Thank you. Matt, do you have anything you want to add?
So certainly agree with the truth telling and, you know, the uncomfortable piece. And I think that also lends to a leader's ability to be confident and in getting things wrong in order to grow. I think that's extremely important. I also think it's important for leaders to be curious. I love attending conferences like this, and unfortunately you're speaking to the groups that are really pushing to get it right, and you kind of wish that you'd see attendance from some of the other folks. But, you know, I certainly commend people who come to these types of sessions and are constantly improving and recognize, no matter where you are on the, you know, cultural competency understanding, there's room to grow. So I appreciate that. And then just a general trustworthiness and the ability for a leader to be trusted by their team and trust that things that are said, you know, in confidence when appropriate, stay in confidence, and that employees feel that they can go to you as a leader to share how they're feeling. Because if people aren't bringing issues to you or giving you that feedback opportunity to grow, you know, you're not going to make too much progress. So really, I think those are three of the big qualities. But absolutely agree, Brittany. I think those were really great points. The stats are always scary. You know, but I do love that some progress is being made, of course.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I'm very proud to say that Deloitte, at Deloitte, you know, inclusion is one of our firm's shared values. So we've been in this space for a long time, but by no means are we saying we are perfect. One illustration of that, I will be very vulnerable here, is when I first started at the firm 5 years ago in Atlantic, I realized there was no other Indigenous person that I could find in Atlantic Canada working for Deloitte. And that to me was a problem. So I have to say full credit to the firm. They have really listened, and we've been on a reconciliation journey for the last, well, really for the last year, but really started here in Atlantic Canada about 3 years ago. And really that was about me opening my mouth. And I opened my mouth because I felt safe. So to me, it's about being, you know, a great inclusive leader, aside as well from being courageous enough to be vulnerable enough to talk about those imperfections and be okay with like making mistakes and allowing others to contribute, because, you know, most of us aren't used to personal risk taking at work, right? We're not used to that. So I think that's a great sign to me that there's an inclusive leader at the helm. Also noting that if you have a clear cognizance of your bias, because everyone has bias, you have to be, as a leader, mindful of your personal and organizational blind spots. You've got to make a really concerted effort to be aware and make decisions with this awareness. So that cognizance of bias is huge. I think also to instill trust in people, you need to be, as a leader, to show commitment, like you're in it for the long haul. This is not just flavor of the week, I'm doing this to look good. This is, you're doing this and that you're going to stay the course. So, and I think to your point, Matt, curiosity, you know, you need to be curious about different ideas and experiences. You need, that's where the growth comes from, right? That curiosity, all great things come from curiosity. You know, all the great movements in the world, all the great growth comes from that. And that cultural intelligence that you also touched on, Matt. You know, not everybody sees the world through the same cultural frame, and you want to be motivated to understand other cultures and adapt your style as needed. So I think you really have to recognize how your own culture impacts your worldview as well. And you also have to have the idea in your head that diverse, like a diverse thinking team in the spirit of collaboration. An inclusive leader really empowers others to contribute and make decisions, and they deliberately seek out diverse perspectives. They create an environment where others feel comfortable speaking up. At least that's been my own experience, and your people need to know that you're listening to them. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so key, right? I think some of the things I'm hearing, that the nuggets and the wealth of wisdom here is the vulnerability. I think really anchoring ourselves in that as inclusive leaders, and really recognizing that the more we know, the less we know. And so how can we, through the ways in which we build relationships with our colleagues and with our teams, allow ourselves to open up, and to bring people along on this journey of building more welcoming and inclusive work environments, right? So I love the words I'm hearing of curiosity, of knowing and unknowing, of vulnerability, of listening, and moving and acting on what we hear from our organizations. And I think it connects to a question someone is asking that I want to give some space to in the Q&A here, about what role can allies play? Right. And so I think, Fiona, you spoke to that. Sometimes it's not easy to speak up. And so how can we anchor as allies and put some wraparound supports where people can know that they are supported in speaking up? What are the roles of allies to be able to offer more effective supports?
I could speak for an hour, but I won't. I'm just going to be really succinct on this one. This is one I'm hugely passionate about, and because I have allies all around me at work. Educate yourself. Number one, educate yourself and create the space for others, and really, really listen. What I've seen, and I know how well intended it is, but I've personally seen wonderful people with great intentions inflicting themselves, if you will, like just wanting to take over, wanting to rescue the situation, right? And I'm not saying that, I will say that you have to stand up when you hear something or see something wrong, right? You must stand up and you must speak out. Be, we'll call this out, be anti-racist for one thing. Like that's absolutely, you must stand up when there's discrimination of any kind. And that is number one. You have to feel like, I want to feel that my colleagues have my back, right? But I will allow for if someone just genuinely doesn't understand and wants to learn, and that's okay. I just encourage them to educate themselves on the true history, in this case of Indigenous peoples, on the true history of this land. And then, you know, make an effort, like educate yourself. It's not just about attending rallies and carrying a placard. It's understanding really why, you know, why people are struggling, why Canada exists the way it exists on the backs of, you know, of oppressed peoples. Like really understand that. And it's not about asking people who are non-Indigenous or non-of color to feel bad. Like that's not it at all. It's about recognizing the truth and going forward together. So when you have that spirit inside you, that's and it's authentic, then I mean, there's a whole list of things we can, practical tips we can offer in terms of being an ally.
Yes.
And you can just Google it really quickly, and you'll see all kinds of them out there. So I don't want to go into that more than just to say, bring your heart to the conversation, be genuine, and don't try to rescue. Just ask for what your colleague or your friend wants from you. Ask how you can help.
So powerful, right? And I think that when we even start to ask, what is my role in this? I think that is a good place to start. And there is always an opportunity. And I think as allies, it takes, I think the difference is that rather than waiting for an opportunity to present ourselves, we seek out opportunities to advance inclusivity, and to really do so in the ways in which Fiona has spoken to. I think is so key. So thank you for that. I'm going to come to you, Matt and Brittney, with my second question here. And then I'll ask you, Fiona, you can jump in there after Brittney. How do you know if you're having an impact on your workplace in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion? What are some of those indicators that companies, organizations, and leaders should be looking for and measuring their success by?
Who did you want to answer that?
I'll come to you, Matt, first, and then I'll come to you, Brittney.
Okay, sure. So I guess I would start by saying some of the work that we do with one of our large projects, the Diversity Employment Network, where we support organizations with exactly this, is really one of my first questions is what sort of feedback loop has your organization created? So how are you hearing from employees or people applying to jobs to see how you're doing? So I think that's extremely important. Sometimes it's as simple as asking if whether that's employee engagement surveys or, depending on the organization, what's appropriate for you. But we have this fear of asking those tough questions when, again, going back to your first question about leadership, that's what it is, right? It's being vulnerable, it's doing those tough things, and creating an environment where you can ask for feedback and you can implement those processes for feedback. In terms of, tangible measurables, which I know probably a lot of people on the call, that's kind of what they look for. They're looking for the number pieces of it. I think building diversity, equity, and employment strongly and firmly into your strategic and operational plans is extremely important. And then you can look at things like, are people applying? Are people getting employed? Are people making it through interviews? Is our board diverse? Do people feel welcome when they join the organization? But I think it's extremely important that it's very much embedded in the strategic and operational plan, because sometimes if an organization can, I guess, succeed on paper without diversity, equity, and inclusion, where's the push coming from? It's fine if it's from the leadership, but if it's not embedded in everything you do, I don't think the needle's going to move.
Matt, thank you, Matt. Brittney, you have something you want to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I would echo everything that has been said already for sure. And I think because people do generally want a specific actionable item, I'll give you one. With respect to equity hiring, a thing that you can do, and the data is there to support it, is when it comes to your kind of final group of interviewees for a position, say you have 5, if there is only one member of an equity-seeking group or a historically excluded community, statistically, Gallup tells us that they have a 0% chance of getting the job. But as soon as there are 2, they have a 50% chance. So that's something that everybody can go do in your hiring panels moving forward, your candidate pools. Make sure there are 2 people who belong to excluded communities and equity-seeking groups, and you will find that you'll have a pretty big shift in your organization relatively quickly. But in addition to that, what I would add to the great points made by my panel colleagues is hold your leadership accountable for it. That's how you'll know you're having an impact. Tie their compensation to the efforts that you're making around belonging, around equity, around diversity, around inclusion. Because, you know, people will perform when they're incentivized to do so. And that might sound crass about it, but if as an organization you value something and it's a core value, you want your stars performing at that level. You want them to have skin in the game. You want them to see these results. So especially in the C-suite executive levels, tie compensation to DEI practices and principles in your goals in that area.
So critical, a big point. I'm sure there are people taking deep breaths when they hear that, right? It is a huge shift for many. Fiona, you have anything you want to add to this?
Yes, I do. Thank you. This is, I'm really happy to layer on this because it's so important. I think it's really important for organizations to also like mirror contemporary society, right? And at Deloitte, we've actually set targets specifically with Indigenous. And if anybody's read our Reconciliation Action Plan, they'll know this, but if you haven't, go ahead and download it from our website. But it's we actually are at 5%. That's our hiring target of our entire workforce to be Indigenous peoples. So that is what we are doing right now. We have to, because it's not even close to that right now. I'll be very honest about that. And I think one thing that will motivate leaders is to do this, not just because it's the right thing to do and it's a smart thing to do, but it's also, it makes a big difference in how team members feel. And teams and Deloitte has done years of research on this. They spent 5 years researching this. And teams who rate their leaders as inclusive are 17% more likely to be higher performing, 20% more likely to make high quality decisions, and 29% more likely to be collaborative. So these are really important numbers. I think they should take those to heart and understand that, yeah, certainly incentivize them, but put the numbers in front of them. Do they want their teams to be higher performing? Yes. There you go. You need to be more diverse and you need to be inclusive. I think as far as indicators that you should look for as a leader, you know, when you're talking to your people and you start hearing things from them, like I feel inspired to do my best work. I've often said at work and in forums like this, you know, simply being me has been a great career choice. And that's because I'm comfortable speaking up. I feel energized, I feel creative, I feel motivated, I feel psychologically safe, I feel empowered. Those are the kinds of words you want to hear from your people. It goes beyond feeling like you're just being treated fairly or you're at the table. There's a deeper sense that people feel integrated and that they can be themselves. And when you start hearing that, you'll know that you're being inclusive. But until you hear that, you have work to do.
That is so key. You know, I think with everything that you've all said about if we're really investing in equity, diversity, and inclusion for our organization, then we have to invest in the ways and in the places we always invest, right? So financial resources always determine the direction of what we're prioritizing. So you can put an equity lens to the ways in which you are attributing your finances and your resources as an organization. We have to embed it in everything that we are doing. I love those key things around a wellness case for equity and inclusion, especially coming out of this collective trauma that is a pandemic. We certainly have a business case for equity and inclusion that drives innovation. It's good for business, etc. But I think if we can bring in, whether it is a various cultural lens, and certainly for me as an Afrocentric person, if we can bring in that lens and really think about what it means to build community, right? Your employees, your organization, what you're doing is building community. So on what values are you building that on? And so if we can really look at a wellness case for equity and inclusion in our workplaces, you will hear all that which I think the panelists are talking about, and have some key measurable ways to hold yourself accountable to. I love all of that which you've all shared, and I think that there are some key takeaways for our participants. Someone is asking a question that I think builds up on this. I'm going to see if I can ask a couple of you to speak to some of this. And it's around policy. So what unique policies play into encouraging, this particular person's asking about Indigenous, but I want to say equity-seeking people. So what policies play into encouraging equity-seeking people to become part of an inclusive work environment? So in what ways are you, or can organizations engage equity-seeking people in their organizations and companies? So maybe I'll ask Brittney for your thoughts, and then I'll come to you, Fiona and Matt.
Sure. I feel like maybe I have an unpopular perspective maybe on this, because I think it's not on equity-seeking groups to feel included, right? It's on the dominant forces, the organizations, to create the conditions necessary that people feel they belong. And I think that's part of the problem, that we get too wrapped up on, but I'm including you. I'm including you. That doesn't mean you feel included, right? So I think that's something that we kind of have to shift a little bit our mindset on. I am really big on updating and adapting policies with an equity lens because of the accountability function that they necessarily require, right? Because then all of a sudden corrective action is involved if you're not adhering to policy. And so rightly or wrongly, you know, the scare factor that comes with not adhering to policy can sometimes help move needles in directions that we want them to go. So I think that what we do is set progressive, inclusive policies, equitable policies. I really focus for leaders in organizations that have people employed to focus not on work-life balance, but work-life integration, where you can look at the contributions that people are able to make, hire for the potential contribution, not for fit. Fit is just going to get you what you've always had. Look for contributors, bring in new contributors, and then look at ways you can integrate work into their lives. So abandon work-life balance, stop looking for fit, focus on work-life integration, and creating belonging and highlighting and honoring people's ability to contribute to your organization.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, I'll come to you, and then Fiona, I have a special question for you. So I'll have Matt add on to the question, and then we'll come to you, Fiona.
Sure. Thanks, Shakira. Yeah, I think I would maybe speak to how policies are developed, just kind of as a little point. I think, as always, you know, we need to look at how our policies are developed and the language behind it, because too often I see policies when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion that you know, have language like to the best of your ability, and you know, just language that gives the person on the other end of that policy kind of a clear you know, escape if they don't hit these type of targets, or it's just softer language than I think some of these policies deserve. So I think that's an important one, and it's something that all organizations can review their policies all the time, continuously, in the same way that we educate ourselves continuously. You know, I think everyone who's in this conference today hopefully would take something away that at least deserves a review of your policies, because you should have more knowledge now than when you left. So I think that one's important. And even when it comes to things like community engagement, which hopefully is being done when these policies are developed, I also think organizations need to be a bit more honest with themselves on what that engagement looks like. I've seen, you know, 2 people participate and that gets the box checked as a community engagement session, you know, when in reality that doesn't quite make the cut. And I think, I think there's room for organizations to be a bit more honest with themselves and find those community partners if you're struggling with things like attendance. There's lots of organizations here in Nova Scotia, especially that can help any organization with these efforts. So it's just being vulnerable, being curious, and putting yourself out there and start that relationship.
I think a key thing here that you're both have spoken to, Brittney and Matt, is all policies, right? Because I think sometimes companies get stuck on, well, I think this policy is about diversity and inclusion, or I think this is about, you know, conflict, and selecting policies from which to apply an equity framework. And I think that what you're both sharing is such a promising practice that we can review all our policies, from the ways in our email policies to interpersonal relationships and conflict resolution and what have you, really looking at the lens and then the framework and applying that to all our policies, because it's about embedding equity in everything that we do. So it becomes second nature and part of how we do business here. So I think that is such an important thing to note and a promising practice. So I've shared that in the chat with you all. If you're in the chat, just maybe send me some emoticon on where you are and how you're feeling, so I here. Fiona, there was a question here that I wanted you to speak to, if you're able to speak to it. And it says, what strategies have been put in place to achieve the 5% goal you were speaking to earlier? And also, what is the timeline? And does that 5% cover all levels of the organization?
Yes, it covers all levels of the organization. And it's in the Reconciliation Action Plan. All of the details, we actually didn't just set targets, we indicate how we're going to do this. We have a long way to go. So we have some specific, I guess, tactical pieces that we're doing. There's a lot of ways to go about this. You know, we want to make sure that we are, say, posting jobs in places we haven't posted jobs before. We understand that Deloitte may not seem like the first place that most Indigenous peoples would want to come work until they understand what we do. We, by the way, aren't just accountants, just so people know that. You can have almost any career and actually work for Deloitte. You could be an engineer, you could be a graphic designer, you could be a journalist, a writer, a communicator. You could do almost anything at this firm. As far as, so that's all outlined in the Reconciliation Action Plan. I'm happy to share it. I don't know if there's a way to do that after this, but if you just go to Deloitte.ca and type reconciliation, it'll pop up and you can take a look. It's there for anyone to use. We actually designed the document so that any organization could use it as a framework if they wanted to. And we wanted to make it public. That's one of the tools. This is one of the things we did. We decided to be public about where we want to go. And because that's holding ourselves accountable. So I would say that's one thing an organization could do, is be very transparent about what your goals are. So, you know, we have a long way to go. As far as the time frame, 2025 is the goal, but we're starting now. So when we look at roles, but we recognize we're not necessarily yet in all of the places where Indigenous peoples may be looking for work. But we're doing that. We're building partnerships with organizations such as, there's an Indigenous software testing company called Plato, actually out of Fredericton. They have national scope, they have global clients. We are partnering with them to collaborate on projects, but also some of their employees, and they're Indigenous software testers, I should say. They're from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who are trained by the organization and employed by the organization to do software testing, amongst other things. But we are also potentially hiring some for cyber work directly from the company. So we're building all these partnerships with schools that are training Indigenous peoples in areas where we have a lot of work. We have a lot of need for people in IT and cyber, just so you know. So if you're looking for work in cyber, Deloitte is the place to come. So those are just some examples of the kinds of efforts we're making, or really no stone will be unturned, but it's a big job. And we actually are hiring an Indigenous recruiter, someone who is Indigenous and is at a senior level, who will create influence in this area and knows all the ways to reach that audience, those potential employees, colleagues. I need more people to join me here in Atlantic Canada.
That is so awesome and exciting. And I feel like putting that somewhere for all our new grads who are looking, and the grads that we want to keep in Nova Scotia. Great opportunities. Thank you. If in this one I can go for to any of you. So maybe I'll ask you, Matt, to share. Someone asked a question here about how do we engage with those who believe that enough has been done? And also maybe speak to ways in which people might be able to identify the gaps in an organization or community, like Kings County. They're specific, so I'll ask you, Brittney, to speak to some of that. But maybe I'll start with you, Matt. How do we engage with those who believe that enough has already been done, and perhaps some tools and strategies that can speak to for organization and ways to identify their gaps within their organizations to improve?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Shakira, and thanks, Paul. Great question, very tough. But I think for that, it's it has a bit of a feeling of trying to change an individual's mindset, which is extremely challenging in my own kind of personal philosophy. Is that I work most closely with the champions and the allies, and that's kind of my approach. But to answer that question, depending on the industry, I think it just goes back to a culture or a feeling of continuous improvement or continuous learning and education. If this is coming from an industry that's, let's say, a trade, an organization that specializes in trades and has a lot of trade employees and unionized employees, if that's kind of where it's coming from, very similar to say the continuous learning that's involved in being a tradesperson and or any real skilled labor or professional. You're constantly improving. I'm a PMP, we constantly have to upgrade. Accountants, they're constantly getting credit. So most important work requires you to continuously learn and improve. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not a destination, right? We don't get there, say we're done, and dust all the, throw the policies on the shelf. It's a long-term thing. I think that just the social pieces now make it feel like a reactive thing that we need to fix right now, when in reality, think of this for the entire life of your organization, because it will always be there. So that's kind of what I would think. And then in terms of identifying gaps in the organization, find community partners, and build that trusted network. One earlier piece that I didn't get to say that I think is extremely important is to build genuine networks of diverse people. Before you need them, just, whatever industry you're in, there are people very different than yourself. Build those relationships early, have those people that you can engage with, and then look at what those gaps are. I already mentioned our diversity employment network, consulting organizations. So, engage with communities or organizations like ours, and we can work through where you are and kind of meet you where you currently are, and look at the goals, and then go from there. So that's kind of, I guess, where I would stand on that question, which is a tough one.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Brittney, you have anything you can add?
Sure. So I think the first thing that might be a little counterintuitive that I try to talk to people about when this sort of topic comes up is that everybody needs to just cool it with being nice and focus on being kind. So when we have people who think that we've done enough and that we've arrived, the nice thing to do would be like, oh yeah, okay, you can think that. I mean, I think differently. I'm not going to rock your boat though. And kindness and a kind conversation we can have is a braver conversation that says, I don't agree with you right now, so I'm going to call you into this conversation. I'm not going to call you out. I'm welcoming you in, and I'm going to hold you through this, create space, hold space for you so we can have a meaningful dialogue around this. It's not easy. It often hurts. It often highlights areas of oppression that are things that we'd rather avoid. But is it worth it? Absolutely. And I think kindness linked to my earlier comments about truth, like together, if you're focused on being kind and truthful, I think we can make significant changes, and we can certainly challenge the status quo. Niceness doesn't rock the boat. Kindness creates opportunities for positive disruption. And so the way we live that here in Kings, we're an anti-racist organization, the municipality of the County of Kings. And so we act in accordance with that. You know, when we have the Grand Council flag that was gifted to us by one of our local Mi'kmaq communities, it flies out in front of our flagpoles in front of our municipal complex. The Pan-African flag is also there. During Pride, we fly the Pride flag. Every time someone calls in complaining that their tax dollars are going to something that they disagree with, every time. We could be upset about that. We could shy away from it. We could not return the call, but we don't. We engage. We welcome those opportunities for disagreement because we care enough about the overall well-being and the health of our community of communities to say, we're gonna talk to you about this because it's important that you understand and start picking up what we're putting down.
How that is so important, right? That we stay the course, and knowing that this is quite a journey. We didn't get to where we are overnight or by accident. So we're not gonna get to where we want to be overnight or by accident either. We have to be planful and strategic and hold ourselves accountable to the vision and the values that which we aspire to, that we call equity and inclusion. I think I want to, if I might also add some of what I'm hearing is, you know, while we might think we have done so much for diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's always really critical that we pay particular attention to communities, right? So, you know, if I can generalize, women might have seen some successes in the workplace because of a commitment to diversifying, but maybe not all women. You know, not Black women, not Indigenous women, not queer women, not trans women. So I think it's really critical for us to be able to work and build those intentional, meaningful, genuine relationships with communities so that when we look at the successes, they're experienced by all members of our communities. We cannot group everyone and toss us in a salad and say, that's diversity, and look how diverse we've become. We have to be able to have, I think what all of you have spoken to, be vulnerable as an organization and transparent in saying, while we have diversified for some groups and we can continue to because there is a need, we can look at this other group and realize we still have so much to do. So I am so grateful for the points I'm hearing and some of these takeaways. So we have questions here that I want to ask you all, and I think they all connect. So I'll ask the two questions that I think connect and then have you all speak to them if you may. How can leaders communicate to their workforce the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging? And then another question that I think ties to it around diverse hiring. And so people don't always hear a lot of organizations or hear a lot about those businesses ensuring a sense of belonging. So what are your organizations doing to ensure both diversity and belonging? So those key things, what can leaders do, and what are the ways in which your organizations are ensuring the prioritizing of belonging and inclusivity? So maybe Fiona, I'll ask you to chime in here, and then I'll come to you, Matt and Brittney.
Wow, that is a wonderful question. I feel like that's a whole other webinar. There's, you know, what businesses can do to ensure a sense of belonging. I think we kind of touched on that already, but I might, you know, go a little bit deeper. I think when organization, if I see a leader in my organization or any organization I've worked with, I'm just thinking about, we talked about courage and about having, the courage to call it out. If you see excluding or disrespectful behavior, have the bravery to stop it as it happens. If you see someone doing that, you feel like you're working for an organization that actually cares, and you feel a sense of belonging when someone's got your back. I'd say, I'm just trying to reflect on my own kind of experience and why I felt so emboldened to open my mouth and say, hey, there's something wrong here. We need to do something around reconciliation. I think I just felt a sense of freedom, and that my voice mattered. I had this intrinsic sense because of how I saw others being treated around me, and that it was a real thing, that it was authentic. It wasn't just a policy, it was a mindset. And that's really, it wasn't about behavior so much as it was just a mindset that I detected. So I saw my leaders self-regulating their behavior, of checking their own biases, being very overt about that, saying, I think I may have a bias here. I want to just take a minute and check that with you all. And I thought that was just, more and more. About 6 months into my job, I realized, oh, you know what, it's okay to be Indigenous here. And so that's, I guess I can only speak from my personal experience. I'm not an HR expert. I'm not a diversity, equity, inclusion expert. I'm a personal experience expert. So that's where I'm coming from. So I don't know if I have all the answers. I think there's just an open-mindedness that you detect in an organization. And I'm sorry if I'm going off the topic. There was a second part to that question. What was the second part or the first part? I can't remember which one I answered.
Yeah, so how can leaders communicate the priorities of equity and belonging and inclusion to their workforce? And I will maybe just add that we have just a few more minutes. So
okay, I'll be 30 seconds. I think, make sure that your leaders and your hierarchical leaders, at least in your organization, are inclusive leaders. Like, you have to run them through that filter and make sure that and so if that means training, if that means getting them exposure to this kind of thing, more formal training around inclusive leadership, do it. This is the workplace of the future will demand that our leaders are inclusive. The old ways are gone. If you're trying to hang on to the old ways, then I'm sorry, you're going to be a dinosaur. You're really, quite frankly, you got to get on this train, because we're going. And so I'd say just get education.
Love that. Thank you, Fiona. I was on
I'd be
mute.
succinct.
Thank you. Matt, do you have anything you want to add quickly, and then I'll go to Brittney.
So I'll just quickly share that when I did join BBI, it was it's certainly an interesting environment. Just by nature, our staff is primarily from the BIPOC community. So one of the interesting I guess things that we do in terms of belonging, because we do still have employees, while Black, some are from Nigeria, some are from Ghana, some are African Nova Scotian, and within there's certainly some similar opportunities for siloing and exclusion and all those types of pieces. So luckily at BBI, we have a great culture of community and family, where while we do certainly have a lot of differences, I would like to think that our employees do feel very included and are treated equitably, regardless of the culture that they've arrived to BBI from. And it is one of those things that helps with retention for us, because I think people recognize that it's challenging to find a similar environment here in Nova Scotia. So that works well for us. And then also, we've kind of taken that approach and that connection to community and did build some of those additional pilot projects like the Den to help other organizations build that same thing within their own organization. So it's something that luckily it's naturally ingrained in the culture of BBI. but sometimes what on the surface might not seem like a situation that needs to be extra inclusive and has additional layers of inclusion, it was an interesting one that I think we do very well.
Thank you, Matt. Brittney, you have 45 seconds.
Okay, I'll be really quick. I think I really loved what Fiona had to say about open-mindedness, and what I would add to that is also open-heartedness. I think they have to go together, probably in life, but definitely in this. And then in Matt's answer, you talked about continuous improvement, and you've mentioned that quite a bit. And having a culture of continuous improvement is something I totally agree with you on. And what I would say where we need to get to is, if we have continuous improvement, we probably also want to have continuous disagreement and challenging, right? And so our leaders need to make it completely safe and absolutely okay to disagree. That doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily change the outcome of a conversation, but it certainly should change the thought process to that outcome. So, you know, and then people feel when you can disagree, you belong. Right? That's why we disagree with our families so much.
Isn't that words of wisdom right there? Listen, thank you all so much. Thank you to Fiona, Matt, and Brittney for sharing of your wisdom, your experience, and of yourself in this space today. This is what inclusion is about, right? The vulnerabilities. And so thank you all for sharing. I want to just kind of thank the organizers and thank Workplace Initiatives team. What incredible work they are doing. And so please be sure to go out into the partners page and look for additional resources. And thank you to the partners and everyone for putting this together. I will leave you with an African proverb to take with you for the rest of your time here today, which is, he who thinks he is leading and has no one following him is only taking a walk. There is such a real call for inclusive leaders. So thank you all for stepping up. We are now going to take our wellness break. So I will welcome Laurel to join us for our welcome break. Thank you all so much once again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you to your panel. And it is time for us to take a break. There's musical entertainment from Morgan Toney, and we'll practice some self-care with the help of Hal and Joanne of Body Break. Especially in these times with so many of us working flat out, it's important that we include self-care in our daily lives. And Hal and Joanne will take us through activities we can do throughout our days to feel refreshed and invigorated. We learned so much this morning, but let me assure you there is so much more ahead. And I really want to take a moment to recognize the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion panel that has just wrapped up and was presented by the Department of Labor and Advanced Education. As the panel reminded us, a welcoming and inclusive workplace makes for a healthier bottom line, more innovation and better decision making, and is important to the future of our province and our country. NSBI champions diversity and inclusion, and we believe in this. And that's why we've set up our Businesses of Diversity program a number of years ago. That's also why I'm so happy to have Hal and Joanne with us. They're trailblazers in leading diversity, equity, and inclusion. When Hal Johnson and Joanne MacLeod conceived the idea of Body Break in 1988, they faced huge rejection. And the rejections that hurt the most, in Hal's words, were those that were concerns about the image of a Black Irish man and an Italian-German woman appearing as equal partners. So Hal wondered who would be interested in promoting equality for everyone and interested in fitness and health programs designed for all Canadians, regardless of physical abilities, sex, or ethnicity. Their first client was Participaction, and Hal and Joanne have championed diversity and inclusion ever since. Maclean's magazine said that trying to explain the cultural significance that Hal and Joanne have taken on since then is like trying to explain the cultural significance of Tim Hortons. I am so pleased to welcome them to our event today. Along with Hal and Joanne, we have a special performance for you with 21-year-old Morgan Toney, a Mi'kmaq singer and fiddler from Wagmatug First Nation. Although he has only been playing fiddle for 2 years, his sound is honed like a fiddling veteran. His written songs are derived from his Mi'kmaq-rooted principles and culture, and he's passionate about modernizing old traditional Mi'kmaq songs backed by fiddles, guitar, and drums. So watch for this rising star in the making. The session Morgan Toney recorded for us today is backed by Keith Mullins. The duo have worked out a set of traditional Mi'kmaq tunes they have written together, and a fiddle set for your entertainment today. So enjoy your break, and I'm sure you'll come back feeling refreshed and ready for the afternoon.